Hello, everyone.
Good evening.
And we're live.
And you're live. So, I've had a nice day. You had a nice alms round.
Yeah, it's a nice
Yeah.
alms round. Yeah, it's we had snow on Christmas. It started snowing around 8 a.m. It was just there was no snow on the ground before that, and then by nighttime we had like 6 or 7 inches. So
You had to
and
get the
there's-
plow out.
had to get the plow out. Yeah,
Yeah, snow blower.
yeah. And now it's still a little bit on the ground in the forest, but yeah, nice morning walk.
Yeah, so it's definitely winter. We're feeling it. I'm sure everyone else around the area is feeling it as well. Anything from you?
It's nice to see everyone. I know some people were meditating ahead of the actual session, and that's great to see all together. So, yeah, and these sort of sessions were a little bit new at first, but enjoying them a lot. It's good to be tapped into the community here. So we're very grateful.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
it's
you?
nice.
Do you have a nice day today?
I had a good day, yeah. Yeah, just enjoying some more solitude and getting back to the Kuti, and yeah, so it's very nice. Getting a bit earlier.
It's good to hear.
Yeah.
So we didn't have a suited today, but we had
We have several suttas, but we
Several.
don't have them assigned, so we'll probably intermittently read them out. But yeah, our topic today was brought up by one of our viewers, listeners, and that is on wanting to be liked, which we also subsume that into one of the worldly desires of praise. So the question was, perhaps you could contribute some of your own experiences with this kind of desire, wanting to be liked. It's definitely something I notice in myself and my life, something that wants to drive the ship fairly often, something that's hard to let go of. Caring what people think and self-consciousness also comes to mind around this topic. I can feel I've made some progress with it, but I'd be interested to hear what you have to say. Also, the topic of being or feeling rejected by others is another similar topic. So, I don't know about the two of you, but that's definitely something that's come up throughout my life. It's not even just in daily life, living with these two wonderful brothers. Still, I don't want to be disliked by either one of you.
we like you.
Thanks. Sometimes. You can't say all the time. So yeah, that's just something that, in the way that the Buddha talks about it, in terms of the worldly winds, in terms of seeking praise and avoiding blame, I think one of the things we can talk about a bit later, we don't necessarily have to talk about it right now, but just that it's worldly. It's something that he didn't say, yes, go and seek as much praise as you can, be as liked as you can, make sure that everybody likes you and adores you, and do everything you can to get however many likes. How many likes do we have today? So it's just we need to be careful with that, because we're just yearning for something that's external and that's very conditional, and often that's based on the other side of liking is disliking. When somebody likes you or loves you, that intensity of emotion can very quickly just turn into disliking and hating. And that's one of the reasons we have to be very careful with our seeking of these things, because they're often not helpful towards how we exist with other people. It's mostly what comes to mind is the word needy. So you might think, oh, you're a needy person when you're wanting to be liked all the time. But I think it's pervasive in our society. Just when we see people who are just wanting to be liked, wanting to be adored, and we see it even YouTube is all about the likes, isn't it? Except for our show, although we don't want to be disliked. But yeah, it's just about that kind of continuous need to get as many people who adore you and think you're the best and better than everybody else, and you have more likes than anyone else.
I think it's useful to kind of draw out, at least for me, like drawing out these metaphors. Like you mentioned, these are the worldly winds, and I don't know if everybody is familiar with this term, but this is a concept which comes up in the Buddhist discourses a number of times. There are 8 qualities. We've got, let's see if we can name them all. We've got pain and pleasure,
Fame and disrepute.
fame and disrepute,
Gain and loss.
gain and loss, and
Praise and blame.
praise and blame.
Yeah, that's
Exactly.
the one we're on,
Yeah. So, yeah. So the metaphor here is of winds. Yeah, and so there are a number of places in the canon, say the Dhammapada, like just in the first chapter, like verses 6 and 7, about someone who's well practiced. They are not blown around like the wind, like, a strong, firm rock, is not moved at all by the wind. I don't know. We've got this great view of Mount Hood from when we're walking through White Salmon here. And there's just, no way. I mean, I had the pleasure of just going up there once. I'm not from the area, but yeah, you've got pretty heavy winds up there. It seems like that's the norm. But, the mountain's not, in one sense it is slowly getting blown away, but, it's there, it's a firm presence. Whereas, someone who's not practicing, it doesn't have a firm basis in wholesomeness or inner integrity. They get blown away like a weak tree that doesn't have deep roots. So those are the two kind of main metaphors that I think of wind in the suttas. I don't know if this wind metaphor like hits deeply for you, or if it kind of is just blows right over your head.
I was interested in what you...
Yeah, I think the praise and blame, it's interesting when you asked us to name the 4 different pairs, and if people have questions on this, it's a potent subject, so feel free to type them in. And favorites are listed separately. Oh, yeah, so one commenter just put that, wondered why praise and blame and fame and disrepute are listed separately. They seem like synonyms. And I think I was going to mention the fact that I think it's significant that the Buddha dedicated a whole 2 pairs to something that seemed like quite similar, because I think they are so powerful as motivators, and no small thing. I mean, you can look at the pleasure, pain, and gain and loss as these more important things, but actually I think for many of us, just evolutionarily, if you were put out of the group of chimpanzees, you were dead. So praise and blame, for me, it accesses this really deep primal urge to be accepted. It's not any less than the others. And so, yeah, I think of all the wins, this is the one that really I certainly work with the most. And one of the only, situations that I've had where it was in Thailand, sometimes you end up as a Westerner at these small Thai monasteries, and it was a very lonely time for about a year. I had I was very lonely and a lot of blame, because you sort of just are different than the other monks there. And I really found that practicing metta was one of the few things that really helped. And it was interesting because for me, this thing around praise and blame, naturally you think that what you need is more approval, but I found that what really alleviates it was giving love, even just oneself. So it appears like a hole that needs to be filled from elsewhere, but it sounds cliche, but really I found that practicing metta was the one thing that alleviated it when I was so lonely, and that really helped me that year. So I don't know what your experiences with that are, Venerables.
Did that help you when you gave the metta? Did it help you both deal with not getting praise, and also did it actually affect the way that the monks were dealing with you?
A bit of both, but most the first, I'd say. It really just filled up that hole in a way that externally wasn't available. And even if I had been getting praise, I think it doesn't actually address the need in the same way as giving love. I think what we want most is to give love, because that's the nature of love. You can't get it in that. It's something that is given. The arithmetic of getting doesn't. When you enter into that whole calculus, it never adds up in a good way. But so I don't know. Those are
Yeah, no, that's an incredibly well way to put it. In terms of you see it again and again. These kind of from even other religions, you can't you can't seek something from someone else. You know, it doesn't. If you're trying to get something, it's just not possible. But over and over again, you hear words of wisdom around just giving, and that gives to yourself. I was just wondering, did you find that you needed to practice less then as time went on, like that it sort of established more of a base for you?
I keep, it did for a while, but metta is one of those things I always kind of, I mean, it's interesting. The sutras, the Buddha always talks about like not dwelling in aversion, and I find that's the nature of aversion. Is it something you kind of a low level gray like buzz of aversion is a very natural place for us to live. It doesn't always rear its head, and I find I can slip into that easily unless I'm actively bringing metta to mind once or twice a day. So it sneaks into my life continuously, even now when I'm not careful. And yeah, I've got to be very intentional about practicing metta personally still. For a while, it did establish that basis, but then, you know, I forget, like we all do, I guess.
I think it's interesting because in our tradition, like in all of our monasteries, as far as I know, we're never encouraged to be selfish and go just do your own thing and don't help anybody out. But actually, like one of the things that even Lumpur Pasano talked about the Ajahn Chah tradition was the sense of upataking and attending to someone and caring for somebody else, and especially somebody who's senior and who's been around a while, and you're kind of taking care of them. And that's been said as like a cornerstone of the Ajahn Chah tradition, is this emphasis on attending to not, it isn't just senior monks, it's really your friends, the people you live with, and especially the monks who you don't want to attend towards or you might have aversion towards, and there's sort of a kind of a real encouragement to help. So that's something that is quite beautiful, and sort of a cornerstone, I think.
Yeah,
of our practice.
I really appreciate you bringing that up. It's people might not be familiar this word upatak, which Ajahn Cunda used. So it's basically a Thai pronunciation or a Thai concept based on a Pali word, and it basically means helping out or serving. So like in the Thai forest tradition, it comes in the form of like serving, as Ajahn Cunda said, like one's elders or one's preceptor, or the different people in the monastery if they're sick. You can be a server or an upatak to people who are sick, but you can also, you know, serve your parents. I believe this word comes up in the canon in that respect as well. And why I think this is interesting is that when you're putting yourself in this kind of like this service role of like being a helper, like I want to help my sick friend in any way I can, you know, like you get praised. So it's almost like rather than just like thinking like we can automatically transcend praise and blame, these are wins and I'm just going to totally transcend them Zen style right now. I'm over this praise and blame. I don't care what anybody else thinks. Actually, like inclining our mind in terms of getting praised by the wise for praiseworthy things. So like, yeah, especially if one is like, living in a community where you respect your brothers, you respect your teacher, and like you're helping them with, you know, usually this upataki in Thailand or in our monasteries, it's kind of, you know, small things, you know, like I'll wash my sick friend's bowl or something like that, you know, and these are formalized to some extent, but that's a praiseworthy thing, you know, and good people praise praiseworthy things. It seems almost like a tautology, but yeah, I appreciate you mentioning that, because I think there's a place for that. And yeah, and I think once you have a foothold, a sense of self-esteem that comes from, being someone who does good things and has good friends who praise you for doing good things, then when you have that self-esteem foothold, it's easier to let go of the attachment to praise, which is natural.
Yeah, I think it's important because it can be a sort of addiction, that wanting to be liked and approved of. And so you can also unfortunately see it on the other end, where people, I think I can see it in myself sometimes, doing things in order to get praise. So one has to be really careful to just be aware of that. Like you sometimes talk about the inner weasel or something. So that's kind of you know, like how careful we have to be with, like, you know, just that neediness that we're kind of expressing towards others, wanting to to get something out of an interaction or something. And unfortunately, I think it comes out, you especially when a thought comes around helping someone rather than just an intuition. So I find it like when I intuitively want to help someone, I intuitively want to do something, then it just gets done. There isn't much thought to it. And I'm not saying that there isn't room for thought about doing kind things, but sometimes I think like, oh, I'll do this and maybe I'll get liked or something, then it's really a slippery slope. I just think one has to be really careful with it. And I think even then doing the opposite, which seems like it's not, wouldn't be so helpful, but like sometimes it's also good if you really are addicted to praise to, I'm going to do this so that I'll be liked, or I'm going to do this and then not doing it and seeing, like, oh, like if I don't do something, I'm going to look bad. And then you kind of are with that experience of like, I think I probably looked really selfish in this experience, but what I was doing was intentionally pushing against this desire only to do something for being liked. So it's I just find it's interesting to kind of, a lot of the times just things intuitively come up just to do something nice, and so that's pleasant. But I can see sometimes that's not the case.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys have found that.
No, I mean, it feeds well into this, the question on, you guys are both bringing up, or the parents and such, like, and that sort of question. And so that, the next question was on my mind for that reason as well. But yeah, I don't know if I have much to offer on the
We can jump into that one, yeah.
I just have one other point. It's fairly useful concept or useful terminology. You talked about the neediness. Like in psychoanalytic theory, there's this term for, basically the neediness or the desire and the constant neediness to get like emotional strokes. And the term is narcissistic supply. Narcissistic supply. I need this, constant input of like, okay, give me my, stroke my ego enough, and I think, although it is like, I think used in only like pathological senses in like psychoanalytic literature, I think, most people have like a default level of a narcissistic supply baseline. So like, and of course we're training ourselves to like overcome this. We are in the monastery, and hopefully everybody listening to this too is as well. But yeah, you can't just turn it off. Like I can't just say I don't need positive reinforcement, because that's where we're at. We're born and we've got all these sorts of conditions from our families and from our culture. And like you said at the beginning, like our culture is, they're big into praise and blame from a very early age. And so realizing or looking inside oneself and realizing what one's base rate of neediness is, this narcissistic supply, and then realizing that, and with compassion, like relating to that in a way which can help you overcome it.
And I think you're also correct in saying that, like, you can't just give up all the stuff cold turkey. Like, the Buddhist places such emphasis on good friendship, and that's because good friends will praise those things which are good. And, someone in the comment section mentioned how the worldly winds could almost be looked at as foods. It's what we feed off of. And I think there's a lot to be said when we have a lot of one of the winds or foods, quote unquote, which is helpful, then the others don't seem as important. And if we have a good meditation practice, then we're cultivating a source of pleasure that's internal and not dependent on external praise and blame. And that allows us to let go more and more, which is one of the really important aspects of the practice, I think, for that reason, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's like, it's also how you're talking about it. Like, it's a sense of like, how do you build to this? And how do you kind of get to a place of equanimity around it? Because when we talk about winds, of course, then the counter action to a wind is to be, to not necessarily be pushed over. You could also, though, use it in that kind of Taoist metaphor where it's like you're able to be with wind, but you're not breaking. But more so, like, equanimity, I think, is sort of like the highest form of this where just nothing really seems to bother you. But that's not where a lot of us are necessarily. We are bothered, and so we can't, as you're saying, you can't just turn on a switch and then say like, I'm a quantumist now, or I'm going to be a quantumist, or I should be a quantumist, or then we get into more like blame around ourselves for not being good enough. But it's kind of like, like really like when you feel somebody disliking you, it can be a very unpleasant experience. So the more we become aware of that, then using what Lumpur Pasano talked to me about when I was a fairly junior monk, speaking to him about how he was able to deal with this, he just said, well, I just reflect on the dukkha of it. It's just so unpleasant to be kind of worried about other people liking me or other people praising me. And because I was saying, as an abbot, for those people that don't know, the head of a monastery ends up in our tradition making a lot of decisions, and they're not decisions that everybody likes, because people have desires, and so their desires are being frustrated by a particular decision. And that's, in one way or another, what an abbot is doing, is they're frustrating the monks who live with them. They're frustrating their desire, and that's also so those monks and nuns can see that. So it's actually a way that you say, oh, wow, I didn't realize I had this much desire for this particular thing, and then you think, why doesn't he like me, or to the abbot, or why won't he go with my decision, or I want this or that, and you can be quite frustrated with the abbot, or think that their decisions are wrong just because it's frustrating your own desire. And he just said he has been associated with that for a long time, and he just sees there's so much dukkha in, like, if you're seeking that, you can't really even be a teacher. You can't help people because you're always at the whim of their own disliking, or what it is that they might not approve of you for. So that's just one way I've really enjoyed thinking about it, is just kind of the dukkha of being associated with wanting people to like us when they don't like us.
That brings to mind a sutta from the Mahakassapa Samyutta about Mahakassapa talking about how he taught people, like, and I think probably people on this stream, or all of us, not just like in a formal teaching role, but when you're talking to someone else, sometimes the egoistic thought will come up, like, I'm going to say this so people like me. And in this Mahakassapa sutta, Mahakassapa said, okay, there is the way of teaching Dhamma in which one thinks, I will teach the Dhamma, and then people will gain faith in me and show their faith towards me. Whereas someone who's really found, like, established in the Dhamma, the proper way to think about this is, I will teach the Dhamma, and may people gain faith in the Dhamma. So it's not a personal thing, like, and I find that, regardless if it's like a formal teaching engagement, or if it's just like, talking with friends, like, that's a way to cut out the kind of egoistic yearnings and neediness. Like, okay, if I say anything that's beneficial, may it be beneficial. May people grow in Dhamma, may I grow in Dhamma, and that can undercut the selfiness that comes up. So
well, and just a sense of refuge, that that allows one to do that in the Dhamma. I mean, when that just seems like one of the powers of taking refuge in the Triple Gem, is that you do have this other place to come apart from just meditation, but you're cultivating a sense of being held and cared for in a way that's not completely dependent on those external, constant input of praise. So absolutely.
I mean, after all, it is the goal not to suffer, and so this is what we're actually moving towards. Is people. I remember Ajahn Kundama one time I was praising a Dhamma talk of his, and he just kind of responded like, he was kind of quiet, and I said, he said, I'm just watching the praise. And if you do see it as that, it's just something that's arising, and then it's passing, and it's not something that's yours. You can rejoice though in the fact that you've said something that somebody actually appreciated, and but it's it can come up I remember Ajahn Jeff was being interviewed once, and the interviewer asked, "Have you ever seen any kind of self-aggrandizing or anything in yourself that comes up?" And he said, "Yeah, sometimes I listen to some of my Dhamma talks, when they've been post manipulated or whatever, they've been cut up, or some of the tweaks or whatever have been taken out." It's like, and sometimes I think, yeah, that was really good. And, to hear Ajahn Jeff say that, it's just really funny. Yeah. Do you think this is this is a pretty pointed question? So I think this could kind of help a lot of people. I wanted to read this one. This was, I just want to give a context to this. This was about a question in regards to Ajahn Kovilo's Saraniya pledge, and that was, pledge essentially to just take up some generosity, and an action of generosity that you can, and in a way that's especially like moving yourself aside. And so one of the supporters of the monastery was asking about, in regards to her mother, how she usually prepares breakfast for her, because she lives with her mother now, or her mother lives with her, and she takes care of her. And she said, I get up maybe 4 hours before my mom, so is it okay to kind of, am I kind of violating that kind of generosity if I decide not to eat before her? And my suggestion was no. Maybe it's better just, if you're up 4 hours, that's a lot of time to be without any food if you need to eat and you're feeling weak. But more so, it's like maybe when you're with her, are you offering the food first? Are you giving her maybe what you like? And what I also suggested, recollecting all the things that she does for her mom throughout the day, if her mom's living with her and she's quite elderly, and she hadn't thought of that. Because when we bring those points of generosity back to us, like at the end of the day, you think of all the good things that you've done, and then you recollect that, it really allows you to have quite a peaceful state of mind. Meditations are peaceful, and at least for myself, it's that kind of, as we were talking about, that sort of pat on the back, a feeling of goodness for what we've done. So I wrote that. She was happy with that, but then she wrote, regarding your next conversation on the desire to be liked and praise and blame, I don't know if this situation applies, but I'll take my chances in case you can advise there. Some years ago, I moved back to my country to take care of my mother, who has many mental and physical disabilities. In the last months, I quit my job to take care of her full time. I think this was a nice thing to do, and although I was not expecting a great fanfare to recognize it, I realized I'm only getting constant criticism and false accusations from her, and this drags me down quite badly every now and then. When I'm on online retreats, I can deal calmly with it, but eventually feelings of sadness, resentment, and anger appear again. I try to be aware of them in my body, but usually end up locking down in my bedroom to not explode until it passes. And this doesn't always happen quickly. Maybe there's a better way to respond to this. If relevant to what you're planning to do in your next conversations, it would be great to have any suggestions on how to deal with this more skillfully. So yeah, it's one thing, I think, to have, a feeling that maybe somebody doesn't like you, but then when it sounds, when there's possibly a feeling of being abused by a family member, or very hurt by a family member for the things that are being said, then I do think it can, the knife can go a little bit deeper, especially like with a mother. So yeah, it's that's quite a tough one, actually. I have to say, it's not an easy thing. I would say that just in reading it, my heart goes out, and I feel, wow, that can be a very difficult experience to have, especially with someone who hopefully was very nurturing. You think of mothers, you think of usually nurturing quality, and then this person who's writing is now nurturing their own mother, but they're not getting nurturing back, it sounds like. And I think this is sort of one of the ways that we were talking about, how you can't just turn something off, or you can't stop it from being extremely painful. because something like this is like, wow, how would one deal with that? What are your thoughts after hearing that?
Yeah, no, I also have, my heart goes out to this situation, just also because it's not something with so many people you can choose how much time you spend. But in this case, it seems like the questioner's really, has to be there, at least to some extent, with her mother. And that's a beautiful thing to do. And I think that, the Buddha provided a lot of different means of kind of dealing with aversion and anger. In fact, it's very interesting for some of the defilements like greed. He provides a few pretty specific techniques like contemplation of the body or the elements. But with ways to deal with aversion, he lists there's a myriad of suttas of how you deal with them, whether it's like spreading metta or recollecting that this is just the way the world is, or looking for the good qualities in a person or not bringing them to mind. And I think he provides so many because it's a really difficult thing to work with when there's sort of difficulty with people. I think he gives this many different techniques. One of the ones I've found the most effective for me has been really taking on that person, really trying to think of them as a teacher, and really trying to teach me humility and patience. And I know that the guru who brought Buddhism to Tibet, he heard that all Tibetans were like extremely kind, so he brought his annoying chaiwala with him just so that he'd have someone to help him practice. But also these are kind of soft techniques of recollection, and I think they only go so far. And I think it's significant that in most of the lists of qualities the Buddha lays out, there's always one representative of wisdom. And so with the four boundless abodes of, loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity, there is equanimity at the end. And I think there's a place sometimes for really taking stock of how many resources you have, and giving attention to yourself as well as to this party you're trying to care for. And I think to do metta practice, you really do have to be quick on your feet to realize when spreading metta or helping another isn't where your attention needs to be, but rather being quick on your feet enough to realize that you're the party that actually needs to be spreading metta to yourself. And I find that's frequently the case. Frequently, like, I'm the one in need, and trying to spread it to this other person I'm having trouble with is, like beating my head against a wall, and it goes nowhere. And so in terms of a more practical approach, one things that has helped me a lot is, if you are in this situation, just really taking stock of your limits and not being ashamed of that, and being willing to ask for help or to lay down certain rules, which might help deal with the situation in an impersonal way. So just telling this other person that if they start to criticize you, then you'll leave the room, and that maybe once a week they can give you feedback. But other than that, there's this sort of this thing that's somewhat impersonal, that's just a rule that you're going to abide by, where if they start to criticize you, will leave the room. And I find sometimes it's necessary to impose these sort of external structures when all the sort of soft techniques don't work. But it's a really difficult situation, and my sympathy. What are your thoughts, Ajahns?
I mean, yeah, it's easy to like think about these worldly wins and focus on the worldly aspect of it. This is the world. This is something outside. This is about what other people do to me. Other people's praise, other people's blame, the popularity that I am bestowed from outside, the pain or pleasure that I'm receiving, through contact with the world. But like a lot of it, especially like the praise and blame, there are internal aspects of all of these. And yeah, I think in a situation like tough situation like the one that's being described here, it's you have to know how to praise yourself. I mean, your intentions are good, and yeah, really being able to trust yourself about that. So believing, when your praise is honest and is accurate, then giving it to yourself, one, and then believing it and letting it sink in. It's kind of like self-praise. If you can focus on the qualities less than the person, so like goodness is being done. If you do this, then you're also circumventing the possibility that you might be raising your ego to some extent. But really, I mean, in a situation like this, you just got to pat yourself on the back and just give yourself some self-metta. Like a lot of it is self-talk, is praise for just trying. You know.
Yeah, and we could definitely say that there's worldly winds praise, and there's non-worldly. So there's wholesome and there's unwholesome. And so the unwholesome, I think, is trying to kind of establish how you feel and establish your own experience based on how other people feel about you. But it's, as we've been talking about, it needs to come from an internal place. And in this kind of a situation, it's it's quite sad to read about. And if it's possible, again, I think establishing a boundary is so important, and that can be quite hard. I mean, you have cultural ways where that might not be acceptable, or ways somebody said, oh, I could never talk to my mom that way. But communication is important, and no matter what cultural divides there might be, it's important to try to communicate, to try to actually have an actual sort of exchange where you're able to say, like, this is how I feel, when these things are said or done about me, or to actually counter it and say, well, what are these things that I'm failing at? Although it sounded like one of the things here was that it wasn't even real. The things that were being said were false accusations. So in that kind of situation, it's really challenging, and I think going back to the fact of knowing that it's an almost impossible, untenable situation. It's when you're getting to the degree where somebody's mind is not able to actually see the same reality that you're seeing. We just have to really focus on that metta for ourselves, that kind of caring, and to know, like, well, I am doing the best I can, and in this way, I would say almost finding the kind mother within yourself, really finding that kindness. You can ask yourself, well, what would my kind mother say to me? And you can answer that, because that can be a real place of understanding, to say, oh, I really see, like, that if kindness was there, it would recognize my own kindness. And possibly there are ways that this person's mother is actually saying something. There's something there. If it's not, then it's quite painful. So communication, and then but also, as we're saying, communication with ourselves. It's really important to pick up as wholesome ways that we can kind of talk ourselves into knowing, like, all right, this is still good. This is kindness. So I think that might have been heard, but also knowing that this is just this is where you are at the moment, and not to get too locked into this is how I am, or how I'm always going to be. I mean, these are again thoughts that we say to ourselves, and try to know, like, well, this is how it is right now. It's extremely painful. It's extremely difficult. And I just heard a story about a woman talking about how she cared for her mother the last 3 years and had her mother move in with her. And she noticed that it was quite the opposite, that her mother was being kind to her, and sometimes she wasn't being kind back to her mother. And she really looked at that and tried to internalize that, because a lot of voices were going on in her head around how she's not a good person and she's not kind to her mother. And she turned it around so that by the time her mother died, she was able to actually see very clearly, actually, I did do good. I did the right thing with my mom these last few years, and I took care of her, and I paid attention to her, and I spent time with her, and I don't think now, like, oh, if I had only spent more time, or if I had only done this. And so this person's problem is probably not that at all. But maybe another way to think about it is, if your mother passes before you, what is it that you can now see as regretful, that you don't want to have that regret occur when she dies? and then maybe see if you can kind of backtrack from there to see what can be done.
There's someone who's close to the monastery who's in a similar situation, like looking after a parent, and it's very difficult, going through a very, sounds like the parents even, rather, verbally abusive, and just talking about like the distinction between being judicious and being judgmental, or being critical versus offering criticism. So basically what we're looking at is basically like the mental capacity to see differences. So like you're able to make distinctions. Okay, this is what this person is saying. Is it accurate? Is it not accurate? Is it helpful? Is it not helpful? Is it beneficial? Is it not beneficial? Is this the right time? Is it not the right time? But then not flipping into like the adding negativity and aversion to the picture. So like not becoming judgmental with your judicious thoughts. Like you see that this person is being abusive, and I can see that very clearly, and not, be judgmental and aversive to that person, but just take some other wise response, like get out of the situation or disengage in some way.
Yeah, and I think that to have that sort of ability to not have aversion even while being discerning around a situation requires you to take care of yourself, and to actually, if you're being drained completely, you won't have that capacity. So, really making time in your day where that small voice of your chitta, or whatever you want to call it, of Dhamma, has a chance to speak and direct you. And sometimes what it might say is you need a break. And knowing this person, the supporter, that's probably the case. That what you're doing by caring for your parent is, there's a teacher who says that Dhamma is duty in Thailand. And so, you're getting serious, monk points, and Venerable Dhammadipa has given big purple hearts to you as well. And, a huge anumodana for that sort of sacrifice, but also knowing the supporter, I would say also just to keep some eye on making sure you're caring for yourself, because that's essential if you aren't going to end this period with your mother with resentment, and that might be one of the most important things to keep an eye on. And we're Venerables.
I was just thinking in our lives as monks, we have to deal with this a lot, but not I wouldn't say to the degree. I haven't really experienced a lot of harshness, but it's kind of one of the things that I find that doesn't come very naturally is sort of the teachings on, as we're talking about, like really trying to gain a perspective on what is actually happening while it's happening. Because like when my experience of being a monk in a monastery is the perspective can be quite skewed sometimes. It's like you're living this day every day. It's very similar, the routine, what people do, what you do, and you can get a kind of a skewed perspective, and also you can get very aversive towards one particular person, and we both know what that's like. And so that's, that it's the whole perspective can really get skewed in our mind, and that's where we get into self-blame and kind of judgment and hatred, and we end up hating ourselves or wondering why we're not understanding something. And then somebody can say something that's very clear, and oh wow, I didn't see it that way. One of the things to really to see is like, oh, how am I misunderstanding the situation, and try to really get a broader perspective on what's going on here. Like, it sounds like, from even this question, we talked about mental and physical disabilities. So from there, you basically you're looking at like, wow, there's probably a very skewed understanding of reality from this mother's perspective. And so just knowing, like, we can easily get sucked into that reality and just believe it, believe that we're not worthy, or we are worthy of the criticism, and we just get quite blinded by it. And it's unfortunate because it's just a natural propensity to kind of believe when somebody says you're a jerk. Oh, yeah, I guess I am a jerk. And it's hard. It's hard not to. I think we're like programmed really to get that through communication. Well, we are approaching our end right now, so we were going to try to wrap it up around 45 minutes. I think, maybe Ajahn Kovilo can end with reading a sutta. Yes. And we're going to continue with this theme next week. So, this Friday morning. And then we'll let you know next on this Friday what the next theme will be. But we'll just keep going with praise and blame and liking and disliking for Friday.
And just to remind people that Fridays will be at 7 a.m. And the last person who posted a question, it's a very good one. We'll try to note it for the next session. Yes. And Ajahn Kovilo.
All right. This is just an excerpt from a sutta from Godatta, who was a senior monk at the time of the Buddha. This is from the Theragatha, and it's verse number 14.2. So I'm just going to read a part of it, but hopefully it will get everybody excited for our continuing discussion on Friday morning. And specifically thinking about what Ajahn Chunda said, when somebody calls you a jerk, how do you process that? So this is referring to the 8 worldly winds, all of them. So, no matter what the status of the unaware or the lowliness of those who know, the lowliness of those who know is better, not the status of those unaware. No matter what the unrighteous gain or the righteous loss is better than if there were unrighteous gain. No matter what the praise from fools or the censure from those who know, the censure from those who know is better than if there were praise from fools. And as for the pleasure from sensuality and the pain from seclusion, the pain from seclusion is better than if there were pleasure from sensuality.
Sadhu.
Very good. All right. Well, have a good few days, and we'll see you Friday morning.
Take care, everyone.
Yeah, take care.
Bye, everybody.